Hi, in this video we're going to talk about court rules in Massachusetts, including the Mass Rules of Professional Responsibility. Also, I'm going to show you really briefly how to get to a couple important secondary sources, including the Guide to Evidence in Massachusetts. So I am on the Massachusetts page on Westlaw, and we're going to browse to Massachusetts statutes and court rules, because if you'll remember in the first video we talked about how court rules are usually found within the statutory codes online, and you'll see at the beginning here we have the main parts of the statute, but following that we have all the different court rules, including the rules of general applicability like the rules of civil or criminal procedure, and then we have the rules of the individual courts like the rules of the Supreme Judicial Court or the rules of the Boston Municipal Court, for example. So if you were running a search on court rules and you wanted to look at, for example, both the rules of appellate procedure and the rules of the SJC, you could click on those categories and run a search. But I'm just going to browse today to show you an example of some of these rules. And the first one that we're going to look at are the rules of civil procedure in Massachusetts. So if you open this up using a browser approach, you get a nice table of contents so you can see the different categories of rules. One thing I did want to point out to you is all of these rules have a rule at the front, usually Rule 1, that tells you the scope of the rule. So if you're not sure whether a particular set of rules apply in the court that you're working in, you can open this scope rule and it tells you which rules, for example, the Mass Rules of Civil Procedure, apply in all these different courts, the Superior Court, Housing Court, etc. So let's just go back out and take a look at Rule 7, which has to do with pleadings. We'll go right into Rule 7 here so that you can get a sense of what these look like. And again, it's going to look kind of like you're reading a statute. You're going to get the text of the rule. You're going to see when the rule was last amended. You get some editor's notes, which give you more information about the context of the rule and applying the rule. And then just like when we're in the statute, we get how current the rules are, and we can see that they're current through amendments received January 15th, and in this case. And again, similar to a statute, we have notes of decision. So those are the cases that have been picked by the editors as being most applicable for this rule. We can see the history of this rule, including a past version here, and also some notes by the editors of the important changes. We also have our other key cite results here, so we can get some additional citing references. There's 45 cases, so in addition to the 10 notes of decision, there are some additional cases that have discussed this court rule, and also references and secondary sources to help us understand more background information about this rule. There's even a reference to some material that's available on Practical Law Company. So those are the types of editorial features that you'll get when you're looking at a court rule on Westlaw, which is one advantage to using it over a free source, and you'll get similar editorial information on Lexis. So let's take a quick look. This was a rule of general applicability, the rules of civil procedure. Let's look at the rules for a particular court, the rules of the Superior Court. So I'm back out at that long list of court rules that are in the Massachusetts statutes and court rules, and towards the bottom you can see that we have some of the trial court rules, including the rules of the Superior Court. When I'm here, I just want to point out there's some other things that could be applicable in the Superior Court, including, for example, standing orders of the Superior Court. So that might be another place that you'd want to look for applicable rules. When you take a quick look at these rules of the Superior Court, when you browse, you'll see again we're getting in an outline approach here. And we're going to take a quick look at Rule 9A, which is a rule about civil motions. Again, you have a link to how current this rule is. You have notes of decision, the editorial, the cases chosen by the editors as being important. You have additional citing references here that you can look at, including cases, secondary source material. Obviously, this rule has been mentioned in a lot of appellate and trial court documents. the one thing I did want to mention to you with this source and with other types of sources is that it's good to, even if you had found this Rule 9a by searching, just going to get back out to the table of contents. I want to mention that you should always look at the table of contents to see if there are other rules that might be applicable. This works with statutes too. So this was Rule 9a about civil motions, but it could be that what we're looking for also there might be something applicable in the more general Rule 9 that has to do with motions. Okay, so that's just a reminder to use the table of contents when you're in a source. That's court rules, statutes, regulations, even secondary sources. The next thing I want to look at, and we're going to go back out to the table of contents one, well, maybe two more times, is I want to show you where you can find the rules of professional responsibility in Massachusetts. So as I mentioned in the video, the rules of the professional conduct here are in Rule 307 of the SJC rules. So you actually have to go into the rules of the SJC, and you'll see once I'm in the SJC rules, if I scroll down to Rule 307, it gives me the Massachusetts Rules of Professional Conduct right here, and I can open that up. You can see the different types of rules that are applicable. If you've taken professional responsibility, these categories probably look pretty familiar. Let's take a look at Rule 1.14, which has to do with a client with diminished capacity. And it's going to look very similar to the other court rules that we were looking at. We have a link for currentness. We have some editor's notes. If there were notes of decisions, they'd be linked here, but we do have citing references and a brief history of this particular rule in Massachusetts. So I just want to talk a little bit about the difference between how current the database is and the amendments to a particular rule. So this rule 1.14, it was adopted in 1997. The last time it was amended was March 26, 2015, effective July 2015. So it was last amended in 2015. But the database itself is current through January 15th. So we know that there's been no changes to this rule since this last amendment in March of 2015 and the currentness days of the database, which is January 15th, 2017. So that's the difference between how current the database is and when the rule was last amended. Okay, finally, in the main video, and I'm sure you probably know this if you're going to be practicing in Massachusetts, we don't have official rules of evidence. We have secondary source materials, and one of the most important ones is the Massachusetts Guide to Evidence. So again, I'm in that list of Massachusetts statutes and court rules, and way at the end, you'll see here we have that Massachusetts Guide to Evidence that we talked about in the first video. You can see the different types of categories that are involved. For example, the methods of proving character. And when you take a look at one of these, you can see that we can see how current it is. Just like a statute, there's been enacted legislation, so that's something we'd have to look at. We can look at the editor's notes, which gives us more information about what this subsection is based on, what court rules. Sometimes it's based on a statute. So this is really helpful, particularly in Massachusetts where we don't have a set of codified rules for evidence. Finally, back out at the Massachusetts page, I just did want to mention to you that there are a lot of helpful Massachusetts secondary sources, and when you're working in Massachusetts, you're going to want to look to see see what you have available for secondary source material that's state-based, right? So there are definitely some volumes of the Mass Practice series that could be on point, as well as some MCLE materials. Your reading also mentioned this source, Massachusetts Proof of Cases. In secondary sources now, instead of getting things categorized by topic, we're getting a big long list of secondary sources, and you can filter that on the left, or you can run a search to see if there's a secondary source that's on point for your research in court rules, professional responsibility, or Massachusetts evidentiary issues. Okay, so that's it for Westlaw for today, and the next video we'll go over some similar things on Lexis.